Are you interested in taking your education to the next level? To find a great paying quality job that you enjoy? The City of San Antonio is helping over 28,000 people pay tuition for courses aligned with high-demand, well-paid jobs. It's easy to get started with Ready to Work. Confirm your eligibility. I live in the San Antonio city limits, or I live in Bexar County, and I am connected to the military. I am at least 18 years old. I am permitted to work in the United States. I earn less than the maximum income limit. I am committed to learn more, to earn more. You can begin online by visiting readytoworksa.com. After you apply, a team member will be in touch. Or you can call 311 and get guidance from a real person. You can even walk into one of our partner agencies and say, I want more information about Ready to Work. It's that simple. Our coaches will help you gather the necessary paperwork to confirm that you are eligible. Not available during the workday? No problem. We can help you after hours. Need to bring your kids with you? Totally fine. They are welcome anytime. Not sure if you can do it? Our coaches will offer you a personalized plan to succeed in training and in the workplace. Now is the time to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. With Ready to Work, you can learn, earn, and succeed.
Welcome to the 6th Annual San Antonio City Fest. This year's City Fest event is available online and in person throughout San Antonio. Through the support of our sponsors, this year's virtual series is free and accessible for all. We invite you to share today's conversation on Facebook and help ensure these critical conversations are reaching everyone in the community. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to acknowledge this year's sponsors who partnered with us to make this year's virtual forum possible. Special thank you to our current 2023 presenting sponsor, the City of San Antonio. We also thank our Changemaker sponsor, Bexar County, and our engagement sponsor, Shiner Beers. We also want to thank our Innovation and City Builder sponsors for supporting this year's event. For a full list of sponsors, visit www.cityfestsa.org. If you find value in local reporting, efforts, and civic engagement events like this one, we invite you to support our nonprofit newsroom by joining our membership program today. Check out the link in the chat to donate. Thank you all for joining us virtually. Now let's get started. In today's panel, we've set out to track population and enrollment shifts in San Antonio and to understand how they affect our educational institutions. Changes in our population's composition and geographic spread, including falling birth rates, new housing developments, and shifts in housing costs have reshaped the city of San Antonio over the last several decades, with more than a dozen area school districts dealing with the fallout. At the same time, charter schools have cropped up across the city, providing competition where there once was none. In response to these factors, school officials have taken initial actions like increasing specialty school options, closing schools in some areas, and opening new schools in others. But education in San Antonio is now at an inflection point, with multiple districts discussing and are moving forward with closing in total 21 schools to align the number of school buildings with the current and expected number of students in the years to come. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our panelists, who should be able to help shine some light on how we got here, what this means for education in San Antonio, and where we are headed next. First, I'd like to welcome Ed Garza, who represents District 7 on the San Antonio Independent School District Board of Trustees, and is also known for becoming the youngest mayor in San Antonio's history in 2001 at the age of 32, serving 2 terms as mayor after serving on city council representing District 7. He is also a professional urban planner by trade. Welcome. I'd also like to welcome Lloyd B. Potter, PhD, who was appointed to the Texas State Demographer in 2010 and also serves as the director of the Texas Demographic Center housed at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Thanks for being here. Next, I'd like to welcome Roland Toscano, the superintendent of East Central ISD. Roland is a graduate of East Central ISD schools and the University of Texas at San Antonio. He has worked in the district in nearly every capacity since 1997, including bus driver, coach, teacher, principal, and as of 2014, superintendent. Thanks for being here. And last, I'd like to welcome Bobby Blount, who is the Northside Independent School District Board President and was elected for the first time in 1999. He also serves as the president of the Bexar County School Boards Coalition and achieved the status of Master Trustee as a graduate of the Leadership TASB program. Thank you all for joining us today. With that out of the way, I want to turn to you, Lloyd, to get an overview of how San Antonio has changed in recent years and what some of the factors are that have contributed to those changes.
Sure, but I'm happy to talk about that. So San Antonio is growing. I think if we look historically, from my perspective, at the urbanized areas in Texas, and we certainly have seen Houston and Dallas and the metro areas around them just grow very dramatically and very quickly. And then Austin's kind of taken off and grown pretty dramatically and quickly. And San Antonio has been a little bit slower in terms of its growth, but that has changed. So if we look at the most recent population estimates for the city of San Antonio between, I think, 2020 and 2021 was the fastest growing city in the country. And then the last year that we have data for between 21 and 22, it was the second fastest growing city in the country. So when we look at that growth, what's driving much of it is domestic migration. So people moving into San Antonio from other places within the state and other places across the United States. We do in San Antonio have some immigration, but that's not like the really big driver, especially when we compare ourselves to Houston or Dallas. Those areas just have a lot of immigrants coming in. But again, the real driver of much of our growth has been recently has been net in domestic migration. We have been growing historically a lot from fertility, from birth rate, high birth rates, and relatively young populations, so we don't have that many deaths. But when we look at that, that's been changing, as you noted in your comments. Birth rates have been declining, and in particular, we've seen with the recession pretty dramatic declines in birth rates among the Hispanic population. And of course, that affects San Antonio much more than it does pretty much any place else in Texas. I guess we could go down to the lower Rio Grande Valley. We might see higher percentages Hispanic there, but Texas, San Antonio has, I think, like 64% Hispanic. And so that declining, those declining birth rates mean there are fewer kids that are entering primary and secondary education, and that's clearly it's also affecting some of the school districts that have a high proportion of the population that is Hispanic. And there, and certainly when we look at San Antonio, we see a lot of residential segregation by race and ethnicity. So you see certain segments of the city that have high proportion Hispanic. And again, those, and I should also add, birth rates have been declining for all race ethnic groups, but historically Hispanics have had higher birth rates, and they're now moving down, really beginning to approach those non-Hispanic white population and the African American population. And I know I can ramble on, so I'm going to stop there. And,
definitely. Just really quickly, I wanted to go to the growth you were talking about. Has that been kind of even across San Antonio, or there have been kind of pockets of growth? What does that look like, and what are those areas that are seeing the growth, and are there areas that are seeing actually declining population areas that you know?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and certainly in any urbanized area, you know, that you start off, if you go back to like the 60s and you look at where the population was then, it's pretty much close to downtown and right around downtown. But certainly within the 410 loop. And then we've seen through the decades that, you know, as those areas get built out, as the land use becomes settled, housing units, retail, industrial, and so on and so forth, then there's not really new opportunities for people to live there, and so they have to move further and further out. So we see then certainly the whole infill mainly moving toward the north, historically, north and the west of San Antonio, the areas in between 410 and 1604. And then you go to kind of the past 10, 15 years, and outside of 1604 now, you kind of see all in Helotes and Stone Oak, and kind of now moving up I-35. You know, we're just seeing tremendous growth occurring there. And when we look at the people that are moving into those houses that are kind of further and further out from the urban core, they tend to be people that have moved in relatively recently, moved into the San Antonio area. So they're, you know, and again, they're usually domestic migrants. They tend to also have higher levels of educational attainment, consequently higher levels of income, and relatively speaking, less diversity than what we see in the west side of San Antonio, South San Antonio, and the east side of San Antonio, closer into the urban core. So again, the growth has not been even. And then, you know, I wouldn't say we're seeing any areas that I'm familiar with that are really experiencing population decline. It might, when I say decline, anything dramatic, it might be stabilized. And certainly, as you see the aging of the population, you know, young people will move out and go to school or go someplace else, and then their parents are left behind. So we're certainly seeing the aging of the Latino population, aging of the African American population, and so those areas, their growth, there are fewer people, young people there having children, so that's another impact on school districts in those areas. So that's a factor, but really, if you kind of look at the north and the west side of San Antonio, that's kind of where you've seen the most recent and significant growth.
For sure, for sure. Ed, you were mayor in 2001 and on city council before that. Can you talk a little bit about how San Antonio has changed since those times, and then a little bit about how school districts have kept up with those changes or not?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me with this distinguished panel. And of course, to you, Isaac, as our moderator. In the time since I served as mayor back in really at the turn of the century, 2001 to 2005, the narrative was very similar in terms of we were one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. Most of the geographic growth, as Lloyd indicated, was shooting to the north and the west. And probably the biggest change in terms of the physical growth of our city in the last 10 years has been the investment in the central core, the downtown area. And as Lloyd stated, we were trailing. I saw it as mayor in Houston and Dallas and Austin, all of this housing went up. And I thought to myself, well, it's going to be coming to San Antonio soon. And sure enough, back in around 2005 to 2010, that's when we saw the big investment along the river north, areas to the south of the downtown area. And it's just continuing to expand up Broadway. And that has really provided a new revenue tax base for the central core, attracting younger families or empty nesters, a lot of singles, but really not a lot of families with 2+ children. We've just not seen that either in the downtown core or even in the neighborhoods that have been redeveloping. They tend to be a starter home because they are smaller square footage, smaller closets. They don't have all the big garages, but architecturally, they're appealing to a lot of families, especially kids that grew up in the suburb. They want something different, so they're moving back into the downtown area or older neighborhoods, historic districts, because it's something different from what they grew up with. So that's the opportunity that certainly is in front of us from the educational standpoint. But there's more competition in San Antonio as we've seen elsewhere. And so more institutions are competing for fewer and fewer students that are spread out in a very large geographic urban and suburban living area within the San Antonio area, because I think that's another big factor is our density is very low compared to cities of the Northeast or in the West Coast. And that has a price, not only in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of how we serve students that are in families that are spread out in a bigger geographic area.
For sure. And then just to put the second question to make sure I cover that, do you think that SAISD, I guess in particular, has kind of caught up or kept up with those trends in terms of the number of buildings and the way that they're kind of seeing the enrollment and education?
Yeah, well, we're in the tail end of 2 rounds of community presentations and conversations over almost 40 public meetings that have been held throughout SCISD on the issue of right sizing and showing the community the demographic report that we also commissioned that emphasized that it's a lower birth rate. There's some influence on charter schools in competition, but that equates to maybe 20% of our loss. But most of it is just that families are not having as many kids. The birth rate is lower in the central core of San Antonio. The price of housing is more expensive, so that also prices out families to the newer areas that they can get twice the size of house for a lower cost. And so we've been having that conversation on what's right. Back in the late 1970s, SCISD was about 80,000 students. Today we're at 44,000, but we have about the same number of schools, almost 100, that we did at our peak in the late 70s. And just this past year, we're about 1,000 students under enrollment. So this is happening every year. We close classrooms every day, and that's what we tell our community is, yes, we're having a conversation about right sizing and closing and repurposing schools, but in reality, we have been closing classrooms by the dozens every single school year. People don't see it, they don't hear it, but our infrastructure was built in the 1920s and 30s of schools to be neighborhood schools where kids could walk to school, and was the only choice for many families. And today they have, even within our school district, they have choices. And most students today and families are looking for schools that meet their academic needs over a school that's in their neighborhood. And so that's been a wake-up call for districts. Over the last 10 years, we've created a number of choice schools and internal charter schools, and we're over 5,000 students that don't live in SAISD that choose SAISD because of these choice schools. But even with an influx of 5,000 students a year, it cannot keep up with the amount of students that we're losing due to organic and external causes.
For sure. And Roland, you're on the other end of the spectrum with massive growth and the need for more schools in East Central ISD. Can you talk a little bit about how you're handling that, why people are moving to the area, and then kind of how it's impacting the district and I guess how you're educating students?
Yeah, Isaac. So, obviously, what we're experiencing here is a reflection of some of the things that Lloyd and Ed have already mentioned. It's kind of the natural ebb and flow of population movements in a city from the urban core, but certainly in our city, as we've continued to grow, the city has had the need to establish, housing opportunities for the growing number of citizens, and as well as the growing number of folks moving away from the urban core of our city, and that it's affordable. And so the development that we're seeing out here is massive, such that we'll be doubling in size within the decade. We're 1,000 students up from last year. We're over 11,000, where last year we were at 10, and we're projected to be between 19 and 20,000 by 2030. And again, that's a reflection of a lot of things that we kind of can't control. This is not so much as indicative of folks choosing our schools, or that they're good or bad when compared to others. It's just the nature of the population movements. How we respond to that is the way that school districts have always responded to population shifts. And that's to kind of use our demographic partners to study those trends, to make projections around the corner, to engage our community in conversations around what is the right size of our school district, and what size does it need to be. Are we efficiently using the facilities that we currently have? Are they in the right geographic location as it relates to the footprint of our district and where growth is occurring and where growth is not occurring? And so we'll shift boundaries around, we'll create interesting school configurations to include in-district choice, such that we can manufacture enrollment to the areas of our geography that maybe are declining, so that we can maintain balanced enrollment and efficient utilization of all of our facilities. But ultimately, in our case, we have to go to our voters with ask for additional facilities. The challenge that we've had historically, but most recently in probably the last 15 years, is that we'll go through a 2 or 3 year cadence of really studying enrollment trends, responding to the current condition of our facilities as it relates to their age, inadequacy, et cetera, and do the best we can to provide factual information to our taxpayers. Put a bond referendum forward. In 2016, they supported a bond referendum to respond to the growth that was happening in the rural sector of our community north of Highway 87, which was half of our geography, 100 square miles of what was traditionally agricultural and ranch land. is being developed rapidly. So no schools north of 87, 10 schools south of 87, and it was time to expand. It was a very clear and straightforward decision the community had to make. After the bond passed, some new charter schools that we knew nothing about were approved and opened, that because we're growing, ended up helping us, but would not necessarily have been, the community would not necessarily have supported the same bond referendum if they knew that we were going to have an additional 400 or 500 students migrating out of East Central ISD into some new charter schools in the area. And I'm not being critical of charter schools here. Just I'm talking factually about the way we try to manage by responding to where our populations are, how we most efficiently use our facilities, what information we put out there for taxpayers to make informed decisions. And charters are not part of that information database. And so it makes it very difficult when 15 to 20% of our citizens, children, 15 to 20% of the children living in our school district do not attend East Central ISD schools. That's a moving target. It's a substantial number. So it's really hard to be super conservative, which our community is very conservative when it comes to passing bonds and allocating additional resources to to add facilities. We want to be like all of our school districts in there, very conservative, very fiscally responsible. We want to be aggressive in making sure that our kids have what they need. However, we don't want to be excessive, and that's been the pattern. But for a lot of things Ed talked about, it makes it more difficult in other areas of the city than in others like ours. And the unknown condition as it relates to approving, prospective approved charter expansion, prospective approved new charters, on the horizon, potentially voucher migration. I mean, all of these things will make it next to impossible to be precise when we inform our taxpayers about our needs, particularly as you move beyond the immediate 2, 3, and 5 years. As you're trying to project around the corner, it's becoming more and more difficult.
For sure. And just really quickly, can you talk a little bit about the capacity that you have right now and how close you are to kind of hitting that capacity? And are you going to be able to build schools fast enough to accommodate the kind of growth that we talked about a little bit earlier?
So we're at or near 100% or exceeding 100% in all of our facilities, which has matched the projections that we've tried to account for to include charter migration, private school migration out, and tried to be conservative about what our needs were. So we are currently building 2 elementary schools and a junior high to be able to expand enrollment at those grade levels and in those areas of the community where those schools have exceeded capacity approaching 120%, meaning that students in those particular schools adjacent to or in the area where these schools are being built are either in portables and or using all available spaces in the building for instruction, to include cafeterias during non-feeding times, libraries during non-rotational times, gymnasiums when they're available. So that's our current condition, but we're not building schools until we're at 120% capacity in the way that we project. And that's kind of the trend that most of the school districts in the area, at least in the 28 years I've been doing this in the area, kind of have attempted to follow.
For sure. And Bobby, Northside ISD as the largest district in the region has areas that are seeing both growth and declines in enrollment. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, your perspective on how these enrollment shifts, especially with such a large geographic area, have impacted Northside? And then as you're looking at the future, how you're planning for, I know a school was just opened this year, but opening schools, closing schools, things like that to match with the the trends?
Yeah, it's actually things have sort of changed for us in the last couple of years also. We're finally starting to see, and I'll say finally starting to see our actual total enrollment. Again, I'm saying total enrollment has finally leveled off. We're running about 101,000, a little over 100,000 this particular year. And I think between Ed, Roland, and Lloyd, they did an excellent description of some of the different reasons why that would also apply to us. We had been opening up, we were doing bonds every 3 years, and now we're able to do them about every 4 years, our last couple of cycles. Initially, our last two bonds have been more focused on maintenance and sustainment more than anything else per se. And we've only had like 1 or 2 schools in those. Whereas if you went back prior to that, we had about three to five schools in every single bond that we had, elementary, middle, and high school. So those things are changing, et cetera, in that particular regard. I do want to add a couple other things when we talk about the enrollment, and just to say something a little bit different aspect that we all face, all of our school districts do. One of those is, I know Lloyd made the comments about immigrants, the percentage. There are different individuals coming from different countries that have different designations. We have newcomers, we have immigrants, we have refugees, et cetera. And we continue to see an increase in our enrollment, especially among newcomers. And the reason why I bring that up is a lot of time we think about Central and South America per se, but the number of students that we're getting from Asia and Africa really is impacting our particular enrollment and gives us a challenge in that particular regard on how we have to handle that. The other thing that we're seeing when we think about from an enrollment or a little bit of a different change in a different light is a lot of time you mention the word parents, but the number of grandparents, and I'm sure that Ed and Roland can also relate to this, has significantly increased also that are primarily responsible for the children's education. And that sort of changes things, how you look at things, how you do things, et cetera. And I think that's another very important element. The other one that I think is real critical that has impacted all of us, a lot of times we say since COVID, I'm going to slip and say it again, the percentage of economically disadvantaged in San Antonio has dramatically increased in my way of saying it. Lloyd, I hope that holds up statistically. But that's something that we're very conscious of, and that has a very huge impact for us, for all of us. When you see an increase, I think we've gone up about 8 to 10%. We're about 40-something% prior. Now we're over close to the 60%, if I remember correctly, of economic disadvantage. So that gives us all a different challenge. That requires more of our resources, more of our destinations, et cetera. So those are the type of things, in addition to what you're asking about, that we're looking at when we talk about enrollment.
For sure, definitely. And one of the things I've heard a lot, particularly in the school closure discourse, but also a little bit when talking to folks about new schools being built, is about, I guess, looking at what's going to happen in the future. I know in SAISD, there's been the question of like, what if all of the students come back within the next, several years or the next decade? So, and then I guess similarly, when you're looking at the amount of growth that you're projecting and whether or not that actually kind of pans out, and are you building too many schools? So I wanted to start, Lloyd, with you to talk a little bit about how districts should be kind of contextualizing the projections that they're getting when they're making some of these very permanent decisions, and then open up to the panel to kind of expand on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, projecting the population is probably, especially for small areas, is more of an art than it is a science, even though there is some science that goes into it. But when you have, for the way that San Antonio is carved up in terms of school districts, we have a lot of irregular geographic areas. And so kind of understanding what's happening in those and getting good data that can go into forecasting population is a little bit difficult. So I certainly have a lot of sympathy for superintendents and trustees that are trying to navigate that and trying to get as accurate of a forecast of their population as possible. There are elements of forecasting that are kind of difficult, and one of those is average household size, or how many children they're going to be in households. Is that's something we've seen smaller and smaller households. I think Ed kind of talked a little bit about kind of the revitalization of downtown, and now a lot of young people and retirees are kind of moving down there, and they have small households, and they are not likely to have kids. If you kind of look at East Central, I'm assuming that a lot of the housing is families that are moving out there, and that's probably going to continue. At some point, haven't really looked that closely at East Side to kind of see how much land there is yet to be developed. But at some point, as I mentioned earlier, land use kind of gets set. It's like you're not going to be able to grow any longer. You're not going to be able to build new housing units. What you see happening and that's kind of what happened down in downtown San Antonio. We have, and you're still seeing that gentrification where older housing stock is kind of raised, and then we're building multifamily housing units, and so it becomes more dense that way. But at some point, it's residential, or it's commercial, or it's industrial, and those shifts kind of essentially the growth will kind of level off in a set geographic area, and then the population ages there, and that then has implications for the number of children. So if you kind of look at some neighborhoods who've been around for a while, they all started off with young families, and they all had children, and then the children aged up and went to college, moved away, and there aren't new kids there. But eventually, those houses will turn over. The older population will move into independent living, move away from the area to be with family members, or may pass, and that housing then might then be taken over by a young family again. So you see that sort of regeneration of neighborhoods, essentially, where families kind of age through the neighborhood, and then new families will come in and kind of fill in behind that. But all of that takes a long time, and it's, again, really hard to predict. So I would anticipate, though, that we're going to continue to see a lot of variation across, as I mentioned also earlier, that we're very both racially and ethnically, as well as economically segregated around the city, and that has some implications in terms of what the population looks like, and what households look like as well. And I feel like I'm rambling on, so I'm going to stop there.
Sure, yeah, and I would open it up to the other panelists in terms of how you're contextualizing these demographic reports, and I guess, like I said, using those when there's the possibility that for any number of reasons, things can change when you're making these permanent decisions.
Well, we've been having this discussion in great detail and disclosure to the community at our right sizing meetings that we plan not to sell any of our properties, because for that reason, that we have to be flexible, we have to be adaptable to the demographic shifts, to policy changes, to funding changes. There are so many moving parts that it would not be in our long-term best interest to assume that things will always be, the trends will continue the way they are. So we've made that statement at all of our meetings, and that's brought a little relief to residents, not necessarily parents or grandparents who have kids in the schools, but being prepared to repurpose even short-term, long-term. Many of the schools in 2008, we went through this process in 2008 before I was on the school board. And at that time, there were 30 schools that the district was looking at closing, and they ultimately repurposed 9. One of those was a middle school, and it's now the Young Women's Leadership Academy. Another one was an elementary school right at the campus of San Antonio College. It's now an early college high school. And so by closing a school is an opportunity to repurpose in a way that still can serve the community in a valuable way. And from a school district, perhaps create a concept that, again, becomes a draw for students from all over. We have a big workforce downtown, and they come from districts all over. Sometimes Bobby and others don't like it, but hey, if they work downtown, they're half of ours. So they want to send their kids here, great. If it makes it easier for the family, because at the end of the day, whether you're a charter school or East Central or Northside or San Antonio, the kids that come from our schools are going to impact the quality of life of our entire city and our entire county. And we have to collectively figure out what's the best game plan as the educational landscape shifts for students and families in San Antonio and Bexar County, period, regardless of what ISD or what charter or what homeschool they may be attending. We have to have a why. Why are we offering public education? What is the outcome? How is it tying to our city and our county's vision of the kind of city we want to be? Being the #1 city in the nation for poverty and low educational attainment is not something to brag about. And it's been that way since I was mayor. And so something is not happening right in terms of the collective impact that our school districts are having for San Antonio. A lot of that has to do with the history of segregation, as was articulated. But if we choose to follow a different course, I think we can do that, but we have to start with a common vision. And what's been driving the right sizing is this belief of advancing equity. Even in a school district with 95% economically disadvantaged, there's a big difference of what economically disadvantaged means in the level and degree of poverty. And for those that have parents that are engaged versus those that don't, and those that are immigrant for 2 weeks in this country, and those that have been here for 3 generations. We have a mix of that. But I think the equity question is going to be a big piece of this dialogue of the educational landscape. And it's happening at a time when there's more choice and more opportunities for those that have the ability and have the resources to further the gap from those that don't.
For sure. And I wanted to ask really quickly about that. I know kind of opponents of the school closure process have also kind of talked about equity and said that they see this as kind of a continuation of disinvestment and kind of those historical disinvestment practices and kind of building on redlining and things of that nature. So I guess I want to kind of get your response to that and then open it up to the panel also to just hear about how equity kind of plays into how districts are kind of thinking through their makeup as they accommodate the various shifts.
No, there's truth to that, and that there is this historical segregation and disproportion and distribution of resources in the form of student funding and facilities and community services and infrastructure and housing and what we have to do and what we're focusing on right now is what we can control. We can't control the legislature. We can't control funding, but we can control efficiency. We can control making decisions that are going to put the dollars into the classroom where students and teachers are rather than buildings that are half empty. And we've agreed with some comments at the public meeting saying, yeah, it's great to have a 12-to-1 student ratio, but if it's good for one class, that in a school that has 150 in an elementary school, why can't all students have a 1-to-12 ratio and 150 kids in an elementary school? And that's just not feasible. We don't even have enough buildings to be able to accommodate that kind of luxury. And so we have to balance and put at the forefront equity in the sense that we have schools half a mile apart or within walking distance where students at one school are getting $1,600, $1,700 more per student than the other because one's a bigger school, one's a smaller school. And that is what we're trying to address because we can control that. As far as the macro issues and the historical context, that has a lot more to do with the funding and what we receive from the state and infrastructure development by the city of San Antonio and the county and private investment that's being made by the development community of San Antonio where jobs are being placed and located. And so that's a much bigger conversation that our school board doesn't have direct control, but the right sizing we do.
For sure. And I would open up if anyone else on the panel wants to kind of speak to the equity piece of this, and then kind of how the historical redlining has kind of contributed to where we're at now and how you view that moving forward.
Yeah, I don't know about the second part. I'll say a little bit on the when we're talking about on the equity part. I do want to say, maybe I'll call it a commercial break. I do want to say one thing about San Antonio area. The education system here really has a lot of opportunities. I think sometimes we're a little bit negative about it per se, but believe me, having lived all over the world and everything else, there are some cities across the U.S., East Coast, and some other places that have some very real challenges that we don't face here within San Antonio. So it's one reason why I serve on a school board and will continue to do so. Yeah, we've got some challenges, but we have to realize we've got a lot of opportunities here per se that others definitely do not have. A little bit different angle to look at the equity portion that you're talking about, and Ed touched on it a little bit too. I think the one thing is alignment all the way through, and looking at outcomes to me is the key. I know we're concerned about funding other aspects, and we should be. But if I can say that every single child has that opportunity to go into where San Antonio is going in terms of, I'll give an example, the cyber. We've got billions of dollars that are being invested in cyber with different organizations. If I can begin to expose a child across the whole city to cyber from elementary to middle to high school and let them be productive and successful in that particular regard, that to me is when we get to have an impact on outcomes and equity, et cetera. Same thing with health and emerging technologies and other areas. So to me, we sort of look back at the final picture and then say, hey, how can I get all of my kids there? Then we can begin to achieve what we really want to, in the sense of when we talk about equity and providing opportunities for all kids.
For sure, definitely.
And I would kind of could take that kind of another level, which is, obviously, we're here talking about primary and secondary school, but ultimately our goal is to get kids into post-secondary, whether it's like a certificate program in Alamo colleges or associate degree. We have some great universities here. I work at UTSA, and the UTSA is just kind of like really kind of making a significant impact. And I think we're seeing where now people want it, at least way back. I think, we used to think about UTSA as kind of like a commuter college almost. Now it's like a, tier 1 research university. And it's like the kind of place that people want their kids to go to. And we're increasingly drawing people from outside of the San Antonio area to go there. And then we have Texas A&M San Antonio, and then of course a number of private universities as well that are exceptional higher education institutions. But ultimately, one of the challenges is getting our kids through that pipeline into post-secondary so that they can get good, well-paying jobs that we are creating here in San Antonio. I mean, we've been pretty effective in terms of growing our economy and diversifying our economy so that we have demand for higher skilled, higher paid jobs. And that's the kind of thing that ultimately will address some of these issues in terms of inequality and essentially kind of improve the overall outcomes for all students. When you have students that are getting post-secondary education, getting good jobs, and then they're starting their families, and they're, then it's just it ends up being a multi-generational positive outcome if we're able to continue to make those advances. And we have made very significant advances there. I mean, the Alamo colleges are very impressive in terms of their engagement with school districts and trying to facilitate pathways. And then I think there have been some really creative strategies in terms of trying to make post-secondary education more affordable as well. And that's kind of a key thing here. I think when you kind of think about, I think most parents want their kid to get some post-secondary education and then be eligible and be able to get a good paying job. And I think we have, I think, made some pretty significant positive strides in that direction. Hopefully we'll be able to continue with that.
For sure, for sure. Hanging over this entire discussion is the question of funding for traditional ISDs, as well as the possibility of education savings accounts, which could present more competition for schools that are already facing declining enrollment. One of the original panelists, Representative Barbara Gervin Hawkins, couldn't make it today since she is currently involved in those discussions at another special legislative session on education in Austin. So first of all, I was wondering, we've kind of touched on it here and there, if we could talk a little bit about how the current version of school choice with open enrollment, magnet programs at various ISDs, and then the charter schools has kind of played into the enrollment shifts between districts, but also if that's had any impact on the demographic shifts that we talked about at the beginning.
Well, I'll start just continuing the conversation from the last question based on everybody's comments. It is an issue of equity. And if we really want to move away from the segregated community as it relates to socioeconomics and ethnicity across the city of San Antonio that has plagued us and become more of an integrated, diverse community where opportunities exist, right, in this utopic ideal state where it doesn't matter where you live, what zip code, you've got mixed families, mixed use developments, you've got access and opportunity and quality of all public services to include schools in every area of our community, then we have to think both on the dance floor and elevate our view on the balcony. So on the dance floor, we might be thinking, we need a kid's zip code to not determine their destiny. So we need to create choice and opportunity and parental rights. And for those that have the means to choose and to get their kids there, they can do that. And we've been doing that as a city. And we've got some great examples of high performing schools in areas of our community where students are from the neighboring school, the school district within which the school resides and from around the city, but they may not be accessible to all children because door-to-door transportation may not be part of it, because parental engagement or the ability to engage at the level that that particular school system requires may not be an option, for example. But it still needs to be a line of thinking that we continue to utilize to generate improved quality across our systems and access to quality. But we have to think at the balcony level, is our current means and methods to providing best fit schools, if you will, to match the alignment piece, the alignment of the family's hopes, dreams, and values for their child, and alignment to the workforce and the city's, fastest growing sectors in the local economy. Then we've got to have a broader conversation that includes collaboration among all ISDs. It needs to include collaboration among higher ed and workforce, profit, nonprofit, and we need to look at things in a more holistic view than we've ever done before to move towards this condition where SAISD may have empty seats and empty buildings, but to use Bobby's example, cybersecurity is going to have a workforce demand of X. We project a workforce supply of Y. Huge chasm. Could we holistically come together and invest in the development of such programming that would be maybe housed in SAISD because they have the ability, and we all benefit by finding ways structurally for identification of children, marketing and communicating about that opportunity in those pathways, and getting kids from all of our school districts to fill those buildings in a way that we're providing door-to-door transportation, et cetera. And we're not only asking kids and families to withdraw from their community and enroll in a new one. And I think that that's a piece we've never been able to cross. And there's a bunch of structural reasons for that in the way that we're funded and all those sorts of things. But I think through cooperative agreements that mimic a lot of what we've already been doing across school districts, I think there's a ton of potential there that to tap into a path forward that we've never quite tapped into beyond just the mental models that we've used on the dance floor in the past that have gotten us where we're at today.
If I could add real quick to Roland, or maybe Roland, you may kill me for going against you a little bit on some of it. One thing to realize, a lot of times we talk about zip codes per se, particular school. And I can tell you for a fact, I have the data and be willing to share it. I think everybody has it too. I'll show you the achievement gap even within that same zip code. So if you took me to school and you say this is a much better school, et cetera, in theory, all right, I'm still going to show you the same achievement gap per se. So we have bigger challenges than what's realized at time. And I think our discussions have got to be only a lot broader per se, but a lot more understanding of, okay, why is that the causation and some other things in this particular regard. So I just want to put that out there too, that we've got to be cautious in that regard. And funding does play, and there are things you can do from a funding early on, whether it be from early childhood sense, or whether it be from a small business. One has more equity than somebody else because their demographic a little bit different, or they have more property or family support. Hate to get too much into that because we don't have as much time to discuss those type of things, but they all play into it also.
And I just want to ask
I agree with that, Bobby, and I'm sorry, Ed, just one more comment.
Sure.
I think what we need to move from is mine and yours to yours, mine, and ours in the way that we're thinking about creating equitable conditions for all kids and operational efficiencies for all taxpayers in all of our communities as it relates to all of our facility needs. But I agree with you, Bobby.
No, I just wanted to stress too that, as Roland stated, the innovation piece for school districts to come together and think outside the box is going to be in my opinion, the difference between ISDs surviving, especially older ISDs like SCISD and Edgewood and Harlandale and South San, and those that are landlocked. And the innovation piece will be our ability to survive or our ability not. I mean, when we're at these schools talking about closure, we understand the personal connections and the perspective of the self and how it's impacting their job or their child. And our response is we just want to have SASD survive, period. Public education for all students, especially those that don't have as many opportunities to choose and to decide. And as we've seen with vouchers in other states that have had it the longest, most of the students that use it already are in private school. And so it's going to give a subsidy to private schools that or will then become stronger and able to compete and not have to abide by the same standards, or accountability is not going to be the same to this public schools. And so those are the bigger issues that I personally have with what's going to happen with the vouchers. But it's an opportunity for ISDs and even to some charter partners that align with values, that how can we work together to better serve our students, to better serve our community. We have the same taxpayers. So these are the same taxpayers that are funding vouchers, but yet they're going to be funding vouchers that are going to be hurting school districts. And there's going to have to be some reconciliation with that. And again, it comes back to the taxpayer. So how can we be innovative and come up with new models, new approaches, looking at what school districts have in abundance and what school districts need, and have conversations about what the future of public schools looks like in a rapidly changing market. That and talking to students today, they don't care about neighborhood schools as much as they care about how it's going to meet their needs. The other thing, and alignment is good when the student knows what they're passionate about. Many a times, I've talked to a lot of seniors, they have no idea why they want to go to college. They have no idea. And if they do for 4 years, then they change their mind and they feel like it's wasted because they just went into debt. And so we do have to do a better job of not just having alignment in the targeted industries, but getting kids the opportunity to experience what's out there to determine if they truly have a passion for math or science or art or athletics or whatever it is. But we really need to make sure that it's a purpose-driven alignment that is taking full advantage of the students' wellness, their happiness, their health, because all of that is at the end of the day. And I go back to that why question for school districts. I think we want our students to be happy. We want them to be healthy. We want them to lead purposeful lives. We don't want them to have a degree and a job that they hate at the end of the day. So I look forward to having opportunities to collaborate more and talk about innovation as a way to address some of these things that are attacking public school districts.
For sure, for sure. as we discuss how districts are meeting the moment we're in now, I also want to close out by looking to the future of San Antonio and the education that will create that future. Lloyd, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the demographic shifts and then the population moves that, based on what we're seeing now, that we can expect in the future. And then for each of the district leaders, if you could talk a little bit about what you see as the future of your districts, given that reality.
Yeah, I mean, our population projections for Bexar County, I mean, we continue to have projected positive growth occurring. And that's not just Bexar County. I mean, it's kind of all of the counties surrounding. If you certainly go up I-35, there's a lot of discussion of kind of the Austin metro area and San Antonio kind of, becoming a mega metroplex area. But we're likely to continue to grow. I'm highly likely to continue to grow. I think we've seen some declines in the rate of growth, our projected rate of growth, largely because of the declining birth rates that I was talking about earlier. But we're also going to continue to become more and more diverse as a community. The Hispanic population certainly will continue to dominate the growth and the size of the city and kind of the region. But we have a very, we talked a little bit about immigrants. I think we're starting to now see that the immigrant flows coming into San Antonio have been increasing, and we're likely to see that we become more diverse in terms of having a foreign-born population. That obviously creates additional challenges for school districts. And I think we're probably likely to, as I talked about earlier, kind of likely to see some I don't know if I wanted to use the term gentrification, but kind of regeneration of families in some of the housing where there's an aging population in it. And you'll potentially see some reinvigoration of children in those communities and demand for education. And that kind of gets back to, I think, what Ed was talking about in terms of being nimble and making sure that, we have, some strategy for like, well, if this turns around, we still have the physical capability, and then we just have to ramp up the institutional capability to meet that demand. But as I also said earlier, I mean, our workforce demands are changing, and that is going to be bringing in labor from around the country, tend to be higher skilled, higher paid labor. And that then is going to create additional demand, especially in those areas where those migrants are working. And those individuals are going to have expectations for the schools. I mean, of course, when somebody moves and they have a family, the first thing they look at, I mean, if you just get on realtor.com or Zillow or something, you can always see some report about the schools and the performance of the schools. That's a major decision that people are using when they're deciding where they're going to live, is where can my kids go to school? I think, and we're also at the cusp of this, shifting environment where we're really unclear about where we're going to go with school choice and how that's going to impact both ISDs, but also kind of charter schools and private schools as well. So there's a lot of uncertainty about all of that. But one thing that I am fairly certain of is that we're going to continue to grow. We'll continue to have demand for primary and secondary education, and we better do well at that so that we can get them into post-secondary so we can meet the demands of our growing labor force.
For sure. And then just briefly for the other panelists, if you want to tell me a little bit about what you see as the future of your districts, given all of what we talked about today.
Well, I think in San Antonio ISD, we may be smaller, but we're going to be wiser in terms of the school programs, the innovation, the choices that we offer already. A third of our schools are already school choices. I think in the future, we're not going to have any boundaries, neighborhood boundaries per se. It's going to be based on what the school offers based on the needs of the families and the students. And I think artificial intelligence is going to fundamentally shift the way schools are not only operate, but we're already seeing it in terms of the classroom and instruction, but I think it will fundamentally change the physical layout of how our schools serve our communities, and not just the educational piece, but the operational and other components that we haven't even imagined yet. And I think that's going to happen at a very fast pace.
And I'd just say similarly, we'll continue to see innovative school models, in-district choice, probably the blurring or elimination of boundaries for the schools within our district so that families could kind of find the best fit for their preferences as far as the pathways or economic or educational experiences. Also continuing to build out this very intentional and systematic way to ensure that every child, as they matriculate through the system and they develop an advanced academic readiness, that they're also exploring such that they're becoming very aware of what they're interested in, what they're good at, and what opportunities exist in the economy, so that, as Ed said earlier, they don't leave here uninformed and just go to college to go to college, get saddled with debt, and have no credential, or have a credential for which they're not passionate about pursuing, which has been prevalent in the last 20 years in this country. And we don't want our children to fall victim to that, but that they have clear plans going forward for continuing their education, whatever that looks like, in credentialing attainment with thoughtfulness and in a very intentional way.
Yeah, I guess I just had three quick items for you, Isaac. I know you're trying to wrap it up there. First one is we've always had a plan. So I've been on North ISD board to go to about 150,000. And, we'll see when that happens, timing, what it needs, et cetera. So I'll say that in terms of just raw numbers itself. We've always and will continue to see what the demands are within San Antonio, the Texas, the nation. So, programs like our new academy that's for teachers that are coming up, to cyber type, to some other things, et cetera. We'll continue to evolve and adjust in that sense. Last one, I think this is real important one I do want to bring up. We will continue to work with our best friend neighbors that we have, our 20 independent school districts in a total of all Bexar County, different story. From San Antonio ISD, East Central, everybody else out here. We work together more than people realize, from a trustee's sake, from a superintendent's sake, from an administrator. So there's a lot of collaboration and partnerships, and we'll continue that also.
For sure. Well said. Thank you all for participating in this important discussion. We were just days away from the vote in San Antonio ISD and also the Edgewood Independent School District regarding school closures. And I hope they were able to come away with a greater understanding of how we got here and what is needed as we move forward. Thank you all for participating in today's challenging conversation about the future of education in San Antonio. I'd like to give another thank you to our CityFest 2023 presenting sponsor, the City of San Antonio. We also thank our Changemaker sponsor, Bexar County, and our engagement sponsor, Shiner Beers. We also want to thank our Innovation and City Builder sponsors for supporting this year's event. Again, for a full list of our sponsors, visit www.cityfestsa.org. This is the final panel of our week-long CityFest event. Thank you to everyone who attended in person or virtually. If this conversation was interesting or helpful to you in any way, please forward it to a friend. Our goal as a nonprofit newsroom is to better serve San Antonio with civic engagement events and newsworthy panel discussions that will help tell the story of our city. So thank you for being here and helping us with that mission. And with that, we'll sign off. Thank you all so much.